This is actually a talk that we did a little bit last year, and a kind of a bit of exploration we've been doing over the last few years in the studio. But this is the idea of decoding Gen Z, and looking at that sort of future mindset to create next generation retail. And so you've got today myself, Tom Phillipson. I'm CEO of your studio. And as I mentioned, Howard isn't here, sadly. We've got Ash, who is head of strategy, who's stepping in, who's already said hi. And we also have got the very inspirational Karina Grant. I keep wanting to call you obviously got married recently. So I had a name change recently. So we've got Karina Grant, the co-founder of the Dematerialized virtual goods marketplace. So hello, Karina. And Karina is in Ibiza, so we might have a little bit of internet aggravation, but we should be all good.
Brilliant.
So as mentioned, today we're going to explore Gen Z and how they're very much influencing a mindset across demographic. So with this sort of future consumer in mind, and the sort of expansion of consumers spending time in digital spaces and also purchasing digital goods, we're also going to discuss where we see this sort of physical and digital combination of retail coming into play. And so first we're going to kick off with Karina and myself are going to take a bit of an intro into, I'm going to talk you through your studio and what we do there. And then Karina is going to take you through Dematerialize and what those guys do there. So just a little intro into your studio. So we're around 14 years old. We're based in London, Melbourne, and Amsterdam. But we also do, a majority of our work in the US currently. So what we do and how we describe ourselves, we build brands and experiences that define them. We move ahead of the pace of culture to reimagine the next generation of experience. And our purpose is always reverting back to that inspiring human connection. Doesn't matter what we do, whether it's the physical or digital, it's always, okay, how are we inspiring that human connection? And we've just got a bit of an overview of some of our projects that we have worked on. We work a really sort of broad spectrum, from creating an Amazon salon in London to various different projects with Nike in the US and Asia. Pandora doing product launches physically and digitally. We've also done things like innovation pubs with AB InBev. And working with L'Oreal and Razer as well. And I just wanted to kind of dig in a little bit to Razer, because I thought it was really interesting as we start to think about Gen Z consumer, and Razer is absolutely at the pinnacle of connecting in with that Gen Z consumer. So Razer, if you don't know it already, that although they have got an amazing expansion out in the US currently, Razer is a gaming brand. Based out in Singapore. And when we first started getting into sort of gaming and getting into understanding that gaming consumer, it was such an amazing journey to really understand, why would they have a space that they predominantly connect digitally, but why would they have a space? So that was the journey where we went on. And it's funny, I go and do talks all over the place, and anyone above 24 hasn't really heard of Razer, and I do talks in high schools. And I say, has anyone heard of Razer? And pretty much every single hundreds of students will put their hand up. So it really is connecting to that sort of Gen Z and Gen Alpha consumer. And when we're talking about this sort of connecting to this consumer, and actually what we do as a business, we create these amazing sort of visual virtual models and things. And I think only till now, we've really appreciated the value of these incredible sort of virtual models that we create. So you can see the virtual version of the Razer store in the top right and top left, but then how it's been turned into the physical store. And I think we've got a consumer group who are predominantly online, but if you get their third space right, it's amazing what can happen. We just got a little video of the launch when 2,000 people came to the first day of opening the store, which we didn't really realize that everyone was going to go so wild for it and how fanatical they were. But this was day one, and it definitely became their third space. And there's a little video which you can click on, Danny, which will give you a little bit of a view of it. So as you can see, it was incredible, the turnout they had, and they used this space to stream podcasts, to do live gaming, to meet their friends, to come and play with products that they're aspiring to maybe purchase when they can afford it. And it's an amazing experience, and it was brilliant to be part of that and help create such an amazing third space for them. So I think as we're talking about Gen Z and connecting in with them, I thought this is a really interesting case study. And then this one, just a final one before hand over to Karina. This is something we've worked with Virgin for a number of years now, and to creating experience retail and experiential retail, and we've gone from creating virtual reality roller coasters, which take consumers to Vegas, to just creating these incredibly experiential stores. And you can see the virtual version of it down there on the right, and the physical version of it in the top left. I just think it's really exciting now where kind of the consumers and how they're starting to behave in these virtual spaces is really opening up exciting ways that we can connect physically and digitally. And this is something we've always been as a business, as your studio, but now it's really starting to come into fruition. And that's why I've been so excited about the stuff Karina's doing and really promoting this idea that you can own and purchase and experience virtually as well as physically. And I think I'm going to hand over to you. Hopefully we're all good on the internet.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick with my Wi-Fi at the moment, and if I need to revert to 5G, I shall do that. So yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to join. So I'm the co-CEO of the Dematerialized. Next slide, please. And basically what we are a NFT market space. So we try and differentiate ourselves by calling us a market space rather than a marketplace, which maybe we can dive into in a little bit. And again, I mean, at the moment, we're not as experiential as I would like to be, because there's been so many things. I guess we're a convergence of so many different types of technology, being a Web3 business, that we have to get like the hygiene level stuff first, if you like. But we use WebGL, we use WebAR, we obviously use blockchain and NFTs. And our mission really is to try and allow anybody, and when I say anybody, when I finally get my mum to get in and out of my platform and buy an NFT, that's the day I'm going to kind of do a happy dance. I have to convince her that she needs it kind of first. But in terms of accessibility, I also mean, if you live on an island with a not very good internet connection, if you don't have a graphics card on your laptop, what can you access on your phone? And then also from a purchase aspect as well, setting up your first crypto wallet can sometimes be a little bit of an ordeal. So at Dematerialized, you can pay in crypto, but you also can pay in credit, debit, Apple Card, Google, etc. And so just now we're just a business to consumer marketplace. We don't have a secondary marketplace as yet, but it is coming. And the reason for that is just now we're based on the Luxo blockchain, which is currently a test net. It's a proof of stake blockchain, which means it already operates as a more ecologically and less environmental impact than some of the other ones, i.e. the proof of work mechanisms. And yeah, I guess the big kind of pushback or challenge and opportunity around digital fashion NFTs is what can you actually do with them? So that providing a post-purchase utility and a range of them is something that we do all the time. Next slide, thanks. I won't go over this in detail, but the reason that myself and my business partner Marjorie created the Dematerialized, and full transparency, she is also the co-founder of the Luxo blockchain protocol, is number one, we are definitely as a result of kind of pandemic situations, but it was also a bit of a natural progression, living more of our lives in triangles, squares, rectangles.
We lost her there. Karina, are you still there?
Just, are you losing me?
We lost you for a split second there. You're all good. You're back.
Okay. Just if you can like make a way.
Okay.
You kind of like change over, but yeah, still bad. Okay, cool. Yeah, extension of our identity into digital. The second is when we look at the fashion sector. Basically, it's pretty broken. We work on a very old-fashioned model of push manufacturing, and I think everybody within the sector, whether you're an end consumer or whether you're a curator, we want to find a better way to be more economically equitable, sustainable, and transparent. And then when you look at the digital fashion ecosystem itself, there's a lot of opportunity in there, even in the 2 years that we've been, I should have said as well, we're 1 year and 1 month old. We launched in December 2020. And one of the things I'm very excited about is when you put a digital file and a digital fashion file and a NFT together, that's where you get the value. Next slide, please. Some crazy figures, I guess. Our target market at the moment is gamers, the crypto natives, and the fashionistas, which make just over or under one half of the world's population. Amazing in terms of potential. The very hard thing for us as business owners is how do you ensure that there's a UX and a UI which is enjoyable and usable for each of those different types of people. Yeah, lots of predicted value for obviously metaverse kind of activity. And I guess 2 areas of kind of hardware which are very interesting are the VR market, and I can't wait for AR glasses, as I'm sure many other people can as well. Next slide, thanks. So our points of differentiation are around at the very beginning of the kind of user journey. If you're a crew, we make it as easy as possible for you to mint your NFTs. We have very low gas fees as a result of the way the blockchain has been designed. If you're a consumer or actor, the that you have around the NFT acts as a digital certificate of authenticity, kind of describe it as the best seat you've ever had. Perhaps thinking about NFT as the best loyalty card you've ever had, which are not always. And then in terms of utility, something we focus on a lot, and you can see this aligns the consumers, the gamers, and the crypto community are where and how do you wear it? Where can you take it to in terms of to metaverse and direct to avatar, and trade it and sell it? So these are all things that keep me awake late at night, but in an exciting way. I won't necessarily go over this again either, but the thing that is most exciting or most interesting about an NFT is obviously it's a unique identity which is given and kind of created. And then the second thing is the smart contract that it has inside, which is effectively like a computer program which enables to kind of track provenance, ownership, etc. And it's really that kind of identity plus the contract that makes it turn into just being a regular file. I can click save as and changes it into an asset, which then becomes of value. Next. The 3 kind of categories that we operate in at the moment are around. So the 2D collectibles are kind of similar to what we see in the kind of art. The 3D assets, you have to get more exciting because you can do more things with them. So augmented reality, ions, etc., and portability. And then I do believe there's future for physical and digital twins to be joined together. We call ours phygitals. Some people hate that word, some people don't feel so against it. But I really think this perhaps holds a position in terms of moving to made to order, zero inventory, again, a way that perhaps the physical fashion sector could be disrupted by integrating NFTs in digital fashion. Next slide. This is just a screenshot of one of our product pages, just to show you it's not, it looks very like a kind of e-commerce page, and we designed it kind of deliberately as so. But for those people who are kind of crypto hungry, who can go on a blockchain, block scout, etc., kind of see what's happening. And then we try and tell you a little bit about the asset and kind of how to use it. Next slide. Going so dodgy. And just to give you an idea of the some of the things, launches we've done in the past few years, we work with digital only brands, we work with physical first, if you like, and at a very wide range of price points. You want to be kind of like the digital department store of your dream, and even more recently kind of moving into digital pet wear, kind of interesting kind of product category as well. Next slide, and I think it should be my last slide. Yeah, and we've been very lucky to get good coverage recently. So there you go. Hopefully it wasn't too tilted with a dodgy internet connection, and very handily using someone else's finger. So thank you.
No, that was good. Thanks so much, Karina, for that. That was amazing to hear. And I think, you know, we're really excited about that, almost physical and all that digital twin, and how that works as well in with what we do as well. So that's exciting. So now Ash is going to pick up and take a bit of a deep dive into Gen Z, and you know, hopefully start a bit of a discussion and spark some questions for you guys. So there should be a Q&A button down here. So if you can, you know, I've got some questions that I'm going to ask Karina and Ash, but if you have any questions that you want to put to the guys or myself, just drop it in below, and we can get some of those questions answered. Over to you, Ash.
Perfect, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Thanks, Karina, that was so interesting. And I guess it's almost like we've looked at kind of future tech and how it's evolving, particularly this massive boom we've seen in recent months of like people getting excited and consumers getting excited around NFTs. So we thought it'd be good to kind of start to unpack the consumer a bit more for you guys today, in terms of thinking about who actually are Gen Z and what the implications directly for brands and retailers in terms of thinking about future of retail, thinking about how to engage with them moving forward. So the big question, who are Gen Z? Obviously, they get a lot of hype in terms of the press, the media, and most brands that we work with are desperately trying to understand how to better engage with them in the future. But also, I suppose, look at how technology today and the tech that Gen Z use, including kind of social platforms, need to integrate into kind of like in real life store experiences. So it's a really interesting time. Thanks, Danny. Next slide. So who are they? I suppose the question is, well, we know from our research that we've been doing globally that they're fluid, creative, expressive, and really pragmatic. McKinsey actually have done some really interesting research on them, and talk about how they're hypercognitive, very comfortable in cross-referencing and kind of collating across many different sources of information, and that's on and offline, which is really interesting. They're also building kind of these very complex yet seamless worlds, and then sharing that kind of world and kind of community on and offline, but also in terms of small communities and kind of bigger macro communities. So they're very dynamic and very agile. And as Ford posed as well, like last year, in the near future, Gen Z will become actually the most influential customer, and that's very much around the corner. So even if your consumer base isn't technically Gen Z right now, it will be in the next couple of years. And I guess in terms of thinking about kind of key Gen Z influencers, in our previous research, we've talked about kind of Greta Thunberg and other kind of Gen Z young people that have come into the media and the mainstream. One of our favorites we've chosen to share today is Chica. She's really interesting and was described by Vogue as actually the voice of a generation. She's using her platform to challenge stereotypes around kind of race, mental health, sexuality, and identity. She has over 1 million followers on Instagram and counts Cardi B and Calvin Klein among her fans, which I wish I could say the same. She's recently been featured as well in Rihanna's Savage Fenty show, which is the video that's just looping in the background. If you've not seen it, there's a series of them and they're well worth the watch in terms of content and the sheer amount of kind of creative collaborations that happen within them. And she's done all this and she's only 24. So in her own words, she says she's only just getting started, which I think is pretty incredible. But I guess it's like, what does this mean in terms of, you know, why we're talking about Chica today and Gen Z? Well, actually, I think it signifies that we're in this amazing era where young people now have a platform and tools, whether that's digital or physical, to really create and kind of co-create their future together and also with brands. So what are they kind of uniting in terms of what are their values, what matters to them? Well, firstly, we know that they're really environmentally minded. So 76% of Gen Z say climate change is one of their biggest societal concerns. And there was a really interesting headline in The Guardian last September where it talked about Gen Z flocking to climate careers because they said that there was no point in doing anything else. So I think that's really interesting. And also for me at the moment it is, and what Karina was saying, it's so interesting when you start to think about NFTs and digital sustainability as well. And I think we'll see and hear more about that in kind of the mainstream kind of press and market. So as consumers start to engage more with this, how does that story kind of come across and how the brands kind of integrate within that? Secondly, next slide, please, Danny. They are socially conscious. So we know they're hyper connected and really they're also caring about the people element of 360 sustainability. So 9 in 10 Gen Z consumers believe that companies have a responsibility to address social issues. So community is super important to them as well. Thirdly, they're unapologetically expressive. 56% of Gen Zs consider themselves creative, which I think is really interesting, compared to 44% of those over the age of 24. I think I just saw someone ask in the chat, how old is the oldest Gen Z? So at YS, we kind of cap Gen Z at 24. So unfortunately, I am not a Gen Z consumer. And finally, they are very well-being focused as well. So they are, super aware and hyper interested in kind of the mental and physical health issues of themselves, but also the people surrounding them. They've obviously been born into this world of anxiety. Research shows that 72% of Gen Z say actually managing their stress and mental health is their most important kind of health and wellness concern they have to date. So an interesting time for them moving forward. However, we know that they are those are 4 kind of key uniting values that we talk about in terms of across the Gen Z consumer. But we also have to realize that we can't be we can't brush everyone with the same, I don't know what the phrase is. Anyway, we can't kind of apply those values to everyone. And actually, in terms of geography, it's really important to start considering how Gen Z, in terms of location and the nuancing that needs to happen within this. So kind of understanding your consumer, where they are, their locality is super important to making a really sharp brand experience that is truly engaging. And as I mentioned at the start as well, we're not just looking at kind of like decoding Gen Z, but also us understanding kind of the bigger halo effect they have. You know, they are the future consumer. They're soon to be the main kind of consumer for pretty much every brand globally. And I think it's a really interesting time. We're seeing this halo effect, them radio out their influence. You know, they're affecting kind of their peers, but also kind of their parents and kind of other people's choice as well. And I think it's amazing when you start to think about, you know, that creative platform, their kind of willingness to engage and use technology differently. It's a really exciting future, and we really have to make sure we're engaging with them well. And in terms of thinking about the Gen Z consumer, we've kind of tried to capture this across demographic mindset as well. So not just isolating the Gen Z consumer, but also other creative demographics, bringing them together under this idea of the radical value seeker. So this mindset is all about kind of being kind of social and human, radically optimistic, purposeful and authentic, and really kind of leading with kind of this empathic and emotional kind of lens as well. So if we go onto the next slide, they are kind of this radical value seeker. They are truly purposeful and authentic. So research shows that 85% across demographics are expecting brands to operate with purpose. So value, that's a really important value towards them. They're also super optimistic. WGSN reported that there's this so-called new optimist in terms of mindset that's really rising, and that flexes from boomers to Gen Z, so across demographics yet again. We also know in terms of the social and human element, that's really been enhanced over the last 2 years with the rise of COVID, obviously, and human connection and community has become super important to them. And finally, there's this, as I said, this empathic and emotional element as well. They want brands to truly understand them, really rich, and kind of deliver these authentic kind of experiences. I think what's interesting to note as well is, like, when we work with brands, you know, we're not just talking about experience in terms of the physical, but very much like the integration between two worlds. How does it spark kind of emotion? How does it create intrigue? That's really the key goal. And I think it'll be really interesting in the future moving forward, how we look at kind of creating experiences that deliver on that, but also these other elements as well, to truly engage with the radical value seeker. And I guess the big question is then, like, how does this kind of like mindset really translate into thinking about the next generation of retail and how to create kind of these engaging experiences? What does this actually mean for brands? So it means brand experiences of the future across digital and physical channels really need to kind of bring communities together. As I said, that community element is really important, from micro to macro, online to offline. That's going to be a key driver in the future for retail. They also need to think about kind of encouraging play, particularly post-pandemic. We're seeing that need and kind of like enthusiasm for kind of playful experiences again, particularly also when you think about how that consumer wants to be creative as well. We also know that they are driven by kind of purpose and values. So actually we have to consider that as a filter through all kind of the experiences we're posing forward. And in terms of finally thinking about kind of this idea of translating kind of emotion and kind of sparking intrigue and excitement with consumers into retail, it's really looking about how we kind of add in that human and emotional element to really forge kind of stronger relationships with consumers. So it's a really interesting time. Obviously, I've run through a lot, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of the kind of younger Gen Z consumer, but also that kind of broader mindset that spans across demographics as well.
So now we have a few questions, and you know, I've got a few questions from myself who I really want to, you know, ask you guys and have a bit of a discussion around. But also, if we've got a few in the audience as well, you know, if you have any more, just drop them in as we start in the conversation. But Danny, I might ask you to stop sharing just so we've got some bigger heads talking. There you go. There we go. I like it that Piers is part of the panel. Piers, you jump in if you've got any answers, mate. So we're going to jump in. I think, you know, we covered some really interesting topics there, you know, and I think retail is truly sort of bridging this sort of physical and digital aspect of, you know, how people consume today. And I think in the press, most of you have probably seen, you know, Selfridges are looking to start to sell NFTs in store. So that's really exciting to see how they turn up doing that, to do that. I think as well, most of you probably already seen as well, H&M building their virtual metaverse store. And I think, you know, to Karina's point, which I thought was really interesting, this idea of the physical and digital purchase, you know, this product where you buy in real life and you get a NFT version or vice versa. There's a company called Meta Golden, which we saw, I think there's something they were announcing this week where, you know, it's a really premium product, a really premium jewelry product, where every time you buy the physical one, you get the digital twin as well. So I think that's a really interesting sort of how retail is starting to tackle that. So I think the question to you guys is, you know, if we're looking to engage this sort of next gen consumer, what should brands be considering in their sort of 5-year strategies? And I think I'll put that to sort of Karina. What's your initial thoughts on that?
I mean, almost every kind of like brand we're talking to, like 5 years seems impossible to plan for. So like people just now are like back to working on like 90-day plans or like 180-day plans. I think a lot of things that like Ash kind of raised in your research were points that I think we can resonate with, in that every time we have a conversation with a brand or a creator, I mean, I guess in some ways it's just good practice, but we're like, why? Why are we creating this digital asset, and what's it going to do for who? Which again, I guess in some ways is kind of basic marketing or such like. But I think making sure as well that there is, and it's the reason as well why we want to differentiate ourselves as a experiential platform, because I want to challenge, I guess, the proposition that, I mean, for the first 2 years when digital fashion came out, for example, every single newspaper article called it the emperor's new clothes. And everybody were like, why are people paying money for stuff that doesn't exist? Thank goodness we've moved on from kind of those headlines now. And but there's still a narrative around, if it's not physical, it's not valuable, or it's not personal, or it's not meaningful. So I think if you are a brand who kind of like wants to get into this space, you need to think about what is the relevance of how you do make it back to what you said, like purposeful, emotional. How can you make kind of your stomach flip in a positive way by giving someone a reason to invest in a digital asset or even a physical piece? That's why I think in some ways there's a similarity, I guess, between the two. But I guess, yeah, my advice would be, don't do a 5-year plan. Think a bit shorter, only because, I mean, even when we're trying to decide how many NFTs that we should do per launch, or how do we price a digital collection, which is like a kind of holy grail, and obviously brands are very, we literally have to do it on a day-by-day basis, because if there's a press article, or if there's a massive launch, or something like Nike buys artifacts, or Adidas sells 22 million, that kind of like really kind of puts the barometer of the external environment, which the consumer's in a bubble of. So I don't know if that answers you a little bit.
No, I think it's great, because I think that is just, you do have to work more agile. And I think actually the businesses we're working with, that old historical way of, putting a 5-year strategy together, you can have a 5-year outlook, but, you do need to build in that, because you just don't know what technology is going to be invented, in the short space of time. My wife, as I mentioned to you, Karina, my wife's a NFT illustrator, and she just, it's so hit and miss whether you sell anything. And there's been a real push for women in art and women-led projects. So any women-led projects just completely sold out. And World of Women, just the NFTs just kind of, I think it was about 100 million or something insane they made in a really short period of time. So I guess this sort of new digital way of selling products, and how it might affect physical retail as well, it needs to be much more agile. Ash, same question. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I similar in terms of a mindset. I think, I think even just thinking like how much has happened in the last 2 years, how much that's changed how, we've used technology, consumer behavior has really shifted as a result. I think it's a really interesting time. So yeah, maybe a 5-year plan is ambitious, I guess. A 5-year vision is great. I guess from my point of view, the key would be really to look, I guess thinking from a brand perspective, or from like a creative perspective, it's really looking at bridging the gap between the physical and digital now. I think the key thing is that consumers actually no longer think in channels, but when we talk to brands or work with brands, often we're very still thinking in kind of like, this is online, this is the physical retail experience, or, there's not a very united approach still. And I think actually that's a big near future kind of milestone that we can work towards, is like very much having a united approach, bridging that gap for sure. And I think even just aligning in terms of that internal process will mean that brands can make much stronger strategies in the future to really deliver like a 360 experience that bridges the gap between physical and digital, I guess.
Yeah, that leads very nicely on to the next question I had for you guys, which is, you know, your studio, we're always coming at creating sort of brand world holistically, you know, be it physical or digital, you know, very much looking at this sort of seamless experience, and looking at it as just sort of this, it's another medium to connect to a consumer. To, you know, how do you think I mean, you kind of answered it really, so I might just ask Karina this, you know, how do you think the sort of future consumer sees future retail experience? Do you see it more seamlessly, or is anything in your research you're seeing like consumers shop differently and shop digital products differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you brought up the H&M example, and I guess we did also talk about this a little bit before. And in my previous career as an academic, before I was an entrepreneur, I did a lot of research looking at flagship stores and pop-up stores, and looking at the physical versions and the e-commerce flagships, I guess. And people who made basically a carbon copy of their physical flagship in their digital environment could, I think, depending on the brand. I think if you're a traditional brand, which is like hyper conservative, then it makes sense that your consumers would want to have like instantly recognizable store, the brand cues and things like that they realize. But I think if you're a brand that is potentially a bit more experimental or kind of disruptive or avant-garde, then there's I don't know, that I would say there's what am I trying to say? Expectation that, and we see this in physical assets as well as, in the digitization of assets as well as the digitization of environments. Like, how far should we go? And that you can, obviously, in the digital realm, you're not constrained by geography or budgets kind of work slightly different. Gravity, things like the simple things like that, like you can do slightly different things. So I think one part to your question is around, I guess, the aesthetics. And I think maybe at the moment, because it's still quite new, certainly within a digital fashion element, and maybe even from an environmental perspective, and meaning environmental as in the space that's around you, we're still not seeing enough diversity of stuff. Like I've commented on a couple of articles that we need to move away from kind of like in digital fashion assets, like the shiny cyber aesthetic, in, I guess, the spatial design. Again, moving away from just carbon copying of environment. So I guess that's something that's just kind of top of mind at the moment.
Yeah, I would almost say, I was thinking similar, where it's like, you know, in a way we often say like the physical experience for a brand, or, you know, that someone goes to, has to deliver what online cannot. Otherwise it's like, why would you go? What's the reason? What's the purpose? And I think likewise to what you said, it's almost like, you know, and therefore like online also should deliver something that the physical world cannot. So it's like, for me as well, like consumers, when we think about the future of retail and what consumers are going to expect, I think it is almost that like you know, excitement, something new, something kind of authentic. I think we live in a very saturated world, and actually you know, to spend and invest time in exploring something, you know, whether that's physically or digitally, is a massive investment for someone today. So it's like, you know, how does it deliver kind of that emotional kind of connection? How is it exciting someone? How is it kind of like telling them a story and bringing them into a world? And whether that's a brand world or kind of like a bigger kind of wider narrative, I think that is what consumers of the future will be looking for. And I think also like that's what they're hungry for. I think everyone's kind of, you know, as I said, kind of there's a lot of saturation, a lot of things that are, you know, similar, and it's actually who's doing something different, considering how creative as well, like people are today as well. You know, people are looking to co-create and create their own spaces and products. And I think it's such an exciting time. Like really, we're just almost getting started in terms of like what, you know, the physical, the digital. I mean, in a few years' time, I imagine we won't even talk about physical and digital anymore. It's a bit like saying like, I'm going to go on my computer and go on the internet. It's like, well, of course it's connected to the internet. And I think that will be the same in the near future as well.
I think as well, you know, that you guys kind of touched on it, and I think brands are really getting geared up. I think over COVID, everyone got their digital proposition in order, and I think, you know, you had to get your delivery sort of organized, and you had to get your, you know, real clarity across your digital channels. And I think people are starting to, or brands are starting to really invest in their physical stores. I thought it'd be quite interesting just to hear, you know, is there anything in your research around, you know, consumers actually looking for that physical experience, and, you know, with Selfridges starting to, you know, have NFTs in store, and Karina, you kind of touched on it almost, the trust that's built, or the when something becomes real, when it's physical. I think is there anything around that which is, you know, bringing the sort of digital into the physical? Are we seeing, you know, particular demographics engaging more? Are we seeing demographics getting excited about that? Or is there any sort of learnings? And I'll put that to you, Ash, first.
Yeah, I think a lot of our research we've done, like, you know, globally, and like for, you know, thinking about different projects and categories and sectors, is actually really interesting. The research suggests that, you know, although we think of particularly Gen Z as being very like digital savvy and kind of always online and wanting to connect in that way, the research suggests that they actually still really enjoy physical, in real life experiences. So like coming to a store, particularly within retail, I think that's actually often quite surprising for a lot of people to hear. You know, and I think it comes back to that thing of like consumers really wanting or understanding that, like, you know, the physical world and experience can deliver something at the moment that online cannot, and vice versa. So I think it's almost like, you know, depending on what they're looking for and what need it is, I think that's really interesting. I think in terms of the future, it's like, you know, thinking about physical experiences, and like people currently go to like brand experiences or kind of stores to like engage with the product, touch and play. And a lot of the research does suggest like that kind of physical tactility really drives sales, drives conversions, and increases brand loyalty as well. And I think it'll be interesting in the future, and not that I'm an expert, but like as we start to look at how digital can become more tactile, like for whether that's through haptics or kind of the integration into surfaces, that will be an interesting future. But yeah, currently at the moment there is still kind of like a you know, particularly around Gen Z, it is interesting. They're still very much like appreciating kind of those physical kind of experiences as well.
Yeah, I would say our research kind of, I guess, mimics that, in that we find that kind of older generation, or the top end of Gen Z and millennials, there's a bit more of a pushback against like digital only stuff, and a bit of a kind of I guess a fatigue that we've had. And then I also then see it gets kind of quite kind of like, I don't know, personality based, or almost quite polarized, because there'll be groups of like focus groups that we'll do with consumers, and they'll be like, I never go to a store ever. Like, why would I? Fitting rooms are awful places to make decisions. Why would I not want to make my decisions in the comfort of my own home? But then there is definitely those consumers, and I think it's really interesting. I've been tracking a lot of kind of like social listening posts on publications like Business of Fashion, who've written quite a lot about metaverse and digital assets, and they're like, there's a lot of dislike for digital assets in a metaverse only type like environment. There's so much kind of pushback to that. So I definitely see quite a lot of polarization, and I think, I mean, it's always tricky when you're doing innovation research with consumers, because if you ask them like, what do they want? They don't know what they want until they get it. And so far, we haven't seen a lot of brilliant examples. Like, even if you go to an NFT art exhibition, typically it's kind of made through like giants, it's screen based, so it's not like super amazing. So I think when we see the evolution of that moving to be like what you mentioned before, more visceral, more kind of like attaching kind of more of the senses, I think we'll start to see it kind of be a bit more, I don't know, be a bit more in demand once there's more good examples of it, I guess, is the best thing.
I think the glasses, once glasses start to be, and the lenses are better, and, you know, Apple are really pushing in that area, and I think that Snapchat are really sort of innovating in that area. So I think that that's a whole other dimension, isn't it? When you're able to add this digital layer to a retail experience. And I think we've got a couple of questions as well from the audience. So thank you everyone for sort of participating and sending the questions in. One, which I think it's from an anonymous, which I thought is sort of ties in a little bit to, you know, Karina, we had this discussion around, you know, Gen Z are sort of environmentally minded, and there's been a lot around in the press around you know, negative impact on planet with sort of servers and all of that sort of stuff. You know, how does that sort of match to that mindset, and what part of what are people doing to sort of counteract that, and what's true and what's just sort of news hype?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super valid question, and it's something that's going to be a question at least for another little while, until more of these issues are going to be solved in terms of more blockchains which are equal, more, well, when ETH 2.0 finally does become available. The good thing is that for brands and for consumers who do want to engage in this space, there are now considerable options for and more environmentally sound kind of options. So I feel like, for instance, a year ago, when there was a lot of some of the research, some of the articles weren't so well researched in terms of kind of like the scaremongering which was going around about NFTs and crypto and the impact that they have. And again, I mean, one of the acronyms of this is kind of do your own research. And I think that's like super valid for you as a brand or you as a consumer to kind of engage in this space. But I think the benefits of the provenance and the storytelling and the measurability and the things like that, which NFTs will be able to offer us in terms of provenance and kind of storytelling. I think they're, particularly if we're kind of layering this to kind of like fashion and kind of like retail environments, offer a massive opportunity for brands to storytell this in a different way that's transparent, that's independent, that's decentralized, etc. So I feel that this will become a non-issue in the future, but one of the ways that brands and consumers have to get around it at the moment is education and storytelling, basically.
Great, that's really good to hear, because that's a bit of a discussion we were kind of having. And I think the interesting thing is, you know, these brands that are in NFTs and they are, you know, passionate about the planet, and they realize it's going to be a block to keep them progressing. So they're agile companies and they make change really quickly. So I think that's, you know, I think we're going to see a response to that very quickly. We've got a couple more questions as well. So so this is from Jonah. So there's a lot of talk about brands of the future regenerating, and fits into Gen Z looking for purpose. How will this be crossed into digital? So I guess it's like, how is purpose and being purpose driven moving from physical to digital? And I think that's a distillation of that question.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in terms of as well. I guess for us, we talk a lot about kind of the future is about, you know, regenerating. Gen Z are looking for purpose, and like how that translates into digital. I guess it's like for brands, like conveying that storytelling. You know, making sure you're speaking to your consumer kind of across channel, and like what your purpose is, leading with your values, but most importantly, showing how you're actioning those as well. So we really talk about like, you know, obviously greenwashing is a thing of the past. And so it's really kind of like, yeah, bringing that storytelling to life. And not necessarily, I think, doing it in a very kind of like over in your kind of face way, but in terms of making sure that it's being communicated to consumers. You know, what is your purpose? How are you different? How are you making a stand? And therefore really like, if it resonates with them, then they're much more likely to engage and kind of be more loyal consumers in the future.
I think, Karina, you kind of touched on it a little bit, is that idea of, almost being authentic. If you're going to venture into whether it's digital product, make sure that it is aligned with your consumer, and you're not just doing it for doing its sake. And I think it's the same with, with purpose, just because, it has to be aligned with your consumer base. It has to be aligned with your brand values. If not, the consumers will see through it that it lacks sort of genuine authenticity. And then I'm going to ask Cassie Isherwood. Thanks for joining, Cassie. Cassie is an XYSS. So thank you for a great question. Are there any great current IRL retail spaces appealing to Gen Z? Ash, you must have a plethora of them.
It's one of those things where you're like, oh my gosh, like they've all dropped out my head. No, I think, I mean, there's so many different examples. I think as well, what's interesting is like how brands, it's not just about Gen Z, as I said, it's almost about looking at the mindset, but very much thinking about kind of, I guess, Gen Z and that younger creative mindset. My almost favorite one that has been for a while is Depop. And I just think that they're doing so many interesting things in terms of how they're, they've really understood the Gen Z consumer. They've really understood how they kind of live and breathe online, but also what they want from a physical experience. So, when Depop do kind of a pop-up or kind of a retail offer, it's all about hearing the community voices as well, making that present through the storytelling within the space, through the kind of like brand touch points. So for me personally, I think, yeah, Depop is a really great example. And I think, they're so clever as well with like understanding who their consumer is, like the Gen Z consumer, how they talk and the language they use. And then kind of they talk to them within the same world and language as well, that makes it resonate even greater on a much, a much deeper level, I guess. So I guess we also talked as well recently, TP as well, didn't we, about the Bowie showroom, where it's like this kind of bringing again the community together, young Gen Z people that are interested in kind of like more of the streetwear vibe and products, and giving them a physical space where they can come together, kind of talk about the products they love or the brands they love, and connect in the real world, but also I guess like live that with that community online as well. So I don't know, is there any that you think, Tom, that spring to mind that I missed as well? But
no, that Bowery one, I actually love Depop, just the way they communicate, because they speak to the consumer just in an amazing way that really connects. And I think so many brands get their communication and their tone of voice wrong. So I think, I think it's a great example. But the Bowery one, it's worth watching the video of the Bowery if you Google Bowery store. And I just love the Gen Z explaining the store concept, because it's just so genuine, it's so real, and it's so connected. And it's, it's a Gen Z founded business. And I think that's when you get, they actually get the language, because it's, they're part of that community. And then there's a question from Alexis. And I think this would be for you, Karina. So how much should an individual have ready to create and then mint a collection? So I'm assuming that sort of fashion collection.
Yeah, I mean, it varies quite greatly depending on what platform, I guess, you want to sell on. So there are a number of kind of different opportunities of where you can apply to sell. At Dematerialize just now, we're still kind of in kind of full curation mode. So we're not opening up to kind of independent creators as yet, but that being said, like I would always say, for kind of like your first collection or your first release, focus on kind of iconic or signature pieces, things which are differentiated, things which other people kind of like know you for. And then I would say focus first of all on releasing a maybe smaller collection with a low level of scarcity, so you can test the marketplace. And then after that, use that kind of traditional kind of test and learn approach. And in regards to the cost, it varies kind of massively depending on which platform and which chain you want to go on. So there's quite considerable kind of, well, there's like low barriers to entry, and then there's higher barriers to entry, I guess, in terms of how difficult it is to get into certain platforms. And then for some of them, how much it costs to mint. So sorry, it's a bit of a vague answer, but hopefully there's a couple of things in there that are useful.
Well, I had a good play on your website earlier, and I really loved it. And I nearly bought a person. It's like this sort of spaceman outfit thing, and I was like, "What am I doing?" And but I know I love it, and I think it's really exciting.
What stopped you?
Well, I need to get my Meta Meta account set up on my anyway. It wouldn't work on Safari.
No, you don't. Not for our platform. If you're buying it from ours, you can pay with your regular card.
Okay, all right. I'll get back on there. Don't worry.
Yeah, the saleswomen and me coming out.
Yeah, but you know, I love like brands are really innovating in this area. And Karina, you know, you've done some incredible stuff, and you know, I love the hot second stuff you did originally, and that's what, you know, really sort of inspired me. And I think, you know, as long as brands keep experimenting, not worrying too much about, you know, and dipping the toe in, maybe going to get it wrong sometimes they'll get it incredibly right. And you know, we've seen the power and the money that can be sort of generated with virtual goods. I'm just really excited about this bridge between physical and digital, especially when AR glasses are, you know, in the same with your Apple Watch or your phone or whatever. So it's super exciting. I think we've come to an end. Apologies if we haven't answered all of the questions on there, and if we haven't answered a question, I'll try and get the guys to send some answers out. But thank you so much, Karina, for joining, Ash for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you, audience. Really appreciate your time. So thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day.